In the early 1700s, a powerful kingdom was rising along West Africa's Atlantic coast, the Kingdom of Dahomey, in what is now the Republic of Benin. Dahomey had a centralized government, a fearsome army, and the legendary Agoji, the elite all-female warriors that inspired the film The Woman King. By any measure, it was a remarkable civilization, but it built much of its power on one of history's greatest crimes, the transatlantic slave trade. King Agaja, who came to power in 1718, was the man who turned Dahomey into a slave-trading empire. He conquered the coastal states of Al-Ada in 1724 and Wida in 1727, seizing direct access to the Atlantic and the European slave networks operating there. Some historians believe Agaja initially wanted to disrupt the trade. He sent a delegation to England in 1726 proposing alternative commerce. But facing military pressure from the Oyo Empire, he reversed course, placing the slave trade under a royal monopoly that the Dahomey crown would directly control and profit from. The results were devastating. At its peak, Dahomey was supplying an estimated 20,000 enslaved people per year to European traders. Captives, mostly seized from neighboring kingdoms, were marched to the Wida port in chains, held in dungeons, and loaded onto ships to the Americas. The port today is marked by a monument called the Gate of No Return. Agaja did not invent this system, but his decision to place the full power of his kingdom behind it transformed a regional trade into an industrial machine of human suffering, one that would only grow under the kings who followed him. If Agaja built the machine, King Gizo ran it at full throttle. Coming to power in 1818 after overthrowing his own brother, Gizo was by most accounts one of Dahomey's most gifted rulers, a brilliant diplomat and military commander who freed the kingdom from paying tribute to the Oyo Empire and expanded the legendary Agoji warrior corps. He was powerful, strategic, and widely respected. He was also the most unapologetic slave trader in Dahomey's history. Gizo's economy ran almost entirely on enslaved people. He conducted regular raids against Yoruba territories, particularly the city of Abeokuta, where his forces would descend on villages, kill those who resisted, and march the survivors to the coast. Families were torn apart. Communities were destroyed. The survivors were sold to European traders and shipped across the Atlantic into lives of permanent bondage. During the peak years of his reign, tens of thousands of people passed through Dahomey's slave ports annually, making Wida one of the busiest human trafficking hubs on the continent. In 1845, British anti-slavery envoys visited Gizo directly and urged him to stop. His response was blunt. The slave trade, he told them, was the source and the glory of his kingdom, and abandoning it would tear out the roots of Dahomey's wealth. He was not conflicted. He was not apologetic. He knew exactly what he was doing. It was only under sustained British pressure, including naval blockades, that Gizo finally agreed around 1852 to formally wind down the trade. But by then, his raids had already sent hundreds of thousands of people into bondage. History remembers him as a great king. The people his kingdom sold have a very different memory, if their descendants even know his name. Idi Amin Dada, president, Field Marshal, self-declared conqueror of the British Empire, is one of the most notorious figures in modern African history. Born in northwestern Uganda in the 1920s, he joined the British colonial army as a kitchen assistant and rose through sheer physical dominance and cunning to command Uganda's entire military. On January 25, 1971, while President Milton Obote was traveling abroad, Amin launched a military coup and seized power. Many Ugandans and Western governments welcomed it. Obote had been unpopular, and Amin seemed jovial, accessible, even charming. That facade collapsed within months. Amin declared himself president for life, dissolved parliament, and began eliminating perceived threats with ruthless efficiency. Judges, lawyers, academics, and journalists disappeared. His secret police, the State Research Bureau, operated a torture and execution house in Kampala where people were brought in alive and never came out. The Akoli and Lango ethnic groups associated with the deposed Obote were hunted in what historians describe as near-genocidal campaigns. Between 100,000 and 500,000 Ugandans were killed during his 8-year rule. Bodies were sometimes thrown into the Nile. In 1972, he expelled all 80,000 Asians from Uganda, communities that controlled roughly 90% of the country's commerce, collapsing the economy virtually overnight. In 1978, he invaded Tanzania, a catastrophic blunder. Tanzania's forces, combined with Ugandan rebels, retook Kampala by April 1979. Amin fled to Libya, then Saudi Arabia, where he lived in comfortable exile until his death in 2003. Never tried, never punished. For the families of hundreds of thousands of victims, that impunity has never stopped being an open wound. Jean Bidel Bokassa managed to combine spectacular self-delusion with genuine, stomach-turning cruelty in a way that shocked even the hardened observers of Cold War Africa. Born in 1921 in the Central African Republic, he rose through the French colonial military and on January 1, 1966, launched a coup against his own cousin to seize power. For years, he ruled with erratic brutality, but it was in December 1977 that he staged what history would remember as one of modern politics' most absurd spectacles, his own coronation as Emperor Bokassa I, modeled on Napoleon Bonaparte's 1804 ceremony. The event reportedly cost $20 to $30 million in one of the world's poorest countries, partially funded by France, which had long backed him as a Cold War client. Beneath the Imperial Theater was something genuinely monstrous. Bokassa personally participated in the torture and execution of prisoners. His jails were infamous. Political opponents disappeared. But the act that ended his reign came in January 1979, when students in the capital Bangui protested a government decree requiring them to buy school uniforms, sold, of course, by a company Bokassa owned. His response was mass arrests, followed by massacre. Over 100 children, some as young as 8, were killed by imperial guards. Credible accounts place Bokassa himself at the scene. The international outrage was swift. France launched Operation Barracuda in September 1979. Paratroopers landed in Bangui, overthrew Bokassa while he was abroad, and reinstated his cousin. Bokassa eventually returned to the Central African Republic, was tried, convicted of murder, and sentenced to death, later commuted. He was released in 1993 and died in 1996. The children killed in 1979 never got that second chance. Ethiopia is one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, the only African nation to successfully resist European colonization. Between 1974 and 1991, it was also the site of one of the most brutal Marxist dictatorships in the world, run by Mengistu Haile Mariam. Mengistu rose through Ethiopia's imperial military before joining the Derg, a committee of army officers that overthrew Emperor Haile Selassie in 1974. Selassie was later found smothered in the palace basement, almost certainly on Mengistu's orders. From there, Mengistu systematically eliminated every rival until he stood alone at the top. In 1977, he launched what became known as the Red Terror, a nationwide campaign of political executions targeting opposition movements. Bodies were left in the streets of Addis Ababa as warnings. Families of the executed were charged for the bullets used to kill their loved ones before they could collect the remains for burial. The brutality was bureaucratic in its organization and medieval in its methods. Estimates of those killed under his regime range from 500,000 to 2 million people through executions, forced relocations, and the catastrophic mismanagement of the 1983-85 famine, which killed hundreds of thousands while the government prioritized ideology over food distribution. Mengistu also fought brutal, resource-draining wars in Eritrea and the Ogaden that only deepened the country's suffering. His Marxist rhetoric cloaked what was fundamentally a personal dictatorship that called mass murder a revolutionary necessity. In 1991, rebel forces closed in on Addis Ababa, and Mengistu fled to Zimbabwe, where Robert Mugabe gave him asylum. An Ethiopian court later convicted him of genocide in absentia and sentenced him to death. Zimbabwe refused to extradite him. As of this recording, he remains in Harare, alive, free, and unpunished. The The Democratic Republic of the Congo sits on one of the greatest concentrations of mineral wealth on Earth: copper, cobalt, gold, diamonds, coltan. Under proper governance, it could have been one of Africa's most prosperous nations. Instead, for 32 years, those resources were systematically looted by one man, Mobutu Sese Seko. Born Joseph Desire Mobutu, he rose through the ranks of the Congolese military and in 1965 seized power in a coup backed by the CIA, which saw him as a reliable anti-Soviet ally. Western governments and institutions then provided billions in aid, loans, and diplomatic cover for 3 decades, funding a regime that used all of it to enrich one man and his inner circle. Mobutu renamed the country Zaire in 1971 as part of an authenticity campaign while quietly depositing state revenues into Swiss bank accounts. By the time he was overthrown, his personal fortune was estimated between $4 and $15 billion, accumulated entirely through theft, embezzlement, and extortion. Meanwhile, Congolese infrastructure crumbled, public services collapsed, and living standards fell year after year. He built a personal palace in the remote jungle village of Badalite, complete with an airport capable of landing the supersonic Concorde jet, which he chartered for European shopping trips. Political opposition was not tolerated. Journalists disappeared. Rivals were imprisoned or exiled. The entire state existed not to serve its people, but to serve him. His end came in 1997 when rebel forces, led by Laurent Desire Kabila, swept across the country. The army, underpaid and demoralized after decades of neglect, offered almost no resistance. Mobutu fled to Morocco, where he died of prostate cancer just months later, wealthy, comfortable, and unpunished. The Congo he left behind was shattered, and the conflicts that erupted in his wake have killed millions. Historians trace a direct line from his kleptocracy to the instability that continues in eastern Congo today.